Okay, so at this point I'd like to hand over to Peter to make a start with introducing himself and the rest of the team, and then to take you through the content of the session. So Peter, over to you.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. As you mentioned, my brief here at Campden BRI is to oversee the Consumer and Sensory Science team. The team have basically provided product guidance to clients and members for many years, using well-established protocols and consumer and sensory test methods. What we recognised, however, over probably about 18 months to 2 years ago, is that there was an opportunity to utilise those approaches, not only to provide product development guidance, but also brand development guidance. And it was that opportunity that initiated the launch of the Sensing Brands initiative, which we've developed in collaboration with Simon Harrop, and it's that topic which we'll be discussing over the next 20 minutes or so. So I think at this point I should ask Simon perhaps to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, I'm a sensory branding consultant, which it's a bit of a tortuous route that got me there, but essentially I've been in sales and marketing all my working life, and 25 years ago I started a company called the Aroma Company, which was really set up to help brands to communicate to consumers via the sense of smell. And at the time I started it, I was probably the only person doing this, and it was a bit of a lone wolf, and there wasn't much work at the time. But over the years I came to understand that how consumers relate to brands is more than just through words and pictures. And I've seen that there was an over-reliance on words and pictures. And so I went on a journey and broadened that out into looking at how consumers react and interact with brands across all 5 senses. And over the last few years, I've been really acting as a consultant in this field based on the experience that I've had over those 25 years, helping brands to connect at a more meaningful and emotional level using the senses. But part of that requires a deep understanding of what drives the emotional response to a particular set of sensory attributes, and that requires insight. And that's how I came to be working and talking to Campden BRI, and how we came to our collaboration.
So I'm the last person in the trio here. My name is Sarah Thomas. I'm Section Manager of Innovation and Insights here within Consumer and Sensory Science at Campden BRI. I'm a consumer research specialist. I work closely with a whole range of organisations, from SMEs through to the world's leading brands, to deliver insights for product and packaging innovation. So I've been working with Simon and Peter as an integral part of pulling together and working through the framework of Sensing Brands that we're going to talk to you about, and really making sure there's some really strong consumer metrics present within the framework to assess the new products and packaging that might come out of it. So, Simon, I think maybe something worth just saying is we thought we would take quite a discussion route to the next 20 minutes. So we will have some slides, but we've also got different viewpoints and perspectives to bring on the different issues we raise. So Simon, given your background, perhaps you can kick us off with explaining what is sensory branding and what it aims to do.
Thanks, Sarah. Well, for me, and working with the brands that I've worked with over the years, which is everything from car manufacturers through to Italian cruise lines, Japanese shampoo manufacturers, what I've come to realize is that a brand is essentially a promise. It's a promise that an organization makes to its consumers. And that leads to those consumers or customers having certain preconceptions or expectations, if you like. And then the point is that these expectations are either then reinforced and met in the customer experience of the product, the service, or the packaging. Or sadly, sometimes they can be challenged or even let down and disappointed because the product experience doesn't live up to the brand promise. So this leads to what I believe are three key questions. Firstly, what are these expectations? Now, actually, Peter, could we just go on to the next slide? For me, what I've also discovered is that these expectations and our relationship and to a brand is largely emotional, and this slide sort of attempts to illustrate that. If we think of how we make our purchase decisions and our brand preference across two key axes, on the one hand from emotional through to rational, and then the other from what we might call non-conscious through to our conscious state. Most of the research that I've seen in this area and all the discussions I've had with the brands that I've worked with, there is a common acceptance that the large part of our relationship with brands happens at an emotional level and is largely non-conscious. We're not even aware of the emotional processes that we're going through. And funnily enough, that seems to apply almost more to the bigger ticket items. If you think about when you buy a house, to be honest, it's largely based on how it feels when we first go in there. So if the response is largely emotional, it's important that we have methodologies that enable us to understand that. We could just go back a slide, please. So there are these three key questions. The first of which, as I say, is what is the emotional expectation that that brand promise sets up? Secondly, and crucially, what are the product and packaging sensory design attributes that do or don't deliver to this brand promise? How do we start to understand them, and how can we define what they are and perhaps what they should be? And the final key question is, as a brand, what are these sensory attributes that we can own and make differentiated to enable us to better deliver to that brand promise? Can we create a set of sensory signatures which will enable us to powerfully deliver to the promise so that the customer expectation is entirely aligned with the brand promise? And the Sensing Brands framework or process has been developed to help you as a brand answer these key questions. So what I'd like to do now is hand over to Sarah, who can give us a bit more detail about the Sensing Brands approach.
Thank you. So as you can see from the slide you have up, there are 4 key stages to our approach, and they are sort of there in a logical process. You can go from 1 to 4, but really that does depend on where you are in your journey with sensory brands. So if you're a company very much starting out, trying to understand what your brand values are, how they translate into the emotion and sensory expressions of those emotions and how they relate to the product and packaging experience, then, you know, we very much need to maybe start at stage 1. And this stage 1 is particularly looking at an assessment or audit of whether the product and the packaging and the brand values, are they on or off brand? And we're trying to assess there through a series of workshops to explore the current product and packaging and brand attributes in terms of the sensory expression of those emotional attributes that we've assigned or you've assigned to the product and packaging as it currently is. So through these different workshop tools, we essentially map out where you are now. Where are your products? Where's your packaging? How does that relate to your brand values? We can look at this in relation to your competitors and start to identify from the two, where do you want to be? Where do you want to go? Where are there gaps in your sensory map that you can capitalize on that would really give you a differentiating factor, particularly within a category against competitors. So we call this the brand sensory audit. The second stage there is about creating a desired sensory brand signature. So once we have done the internal work with the R&D teams and innovation and technical teams and brand and marketing teams within the brand sensory audit, we're then very much working about developing those signatures, so those sensory expressions. So this might be down in terms of the detail of briefs that you put out to agency when you're looking at communications, ad agencies, design for your packaging, down through to your technical teams for product specifications, and it's really about making sure the clarity and cascading that communication internally within the company, that what's set out at that strategic brand level does actually get translated all the way through to maybe on the daily basis of the product that is coming out of the manufacturing production line, and that those sensory characteristics of maybe a biscuit in terms of flavour and texture and maybe melting in the mouth and everything is still on brand and with what has been defined in the original place, and making sure that everyone within that organisation has ownership to that brand signature. So we do a lot of work with pulling together as well internal teams within organisations to have an appreciation of each other's role, and also to bring to the forefront how important sensory is and its role it has in trying to communicate those brand values and its relationship in terms of communicating emotion attributes and those relationships with the customer who engages with your product and your packaging. And ultimately, it's them who you want to buy the product more and come back and buy again for repeat purchase. What we also do, once we've also been working internally with different teams within the companies, there is a need for consumer validation, because if you've done your product specs, your communication specs, you would actually want to see that once the other agencies have contributed or your internal teams have gone away and come up with maybe concepts, that you really want those validated by your loyal consumers or your brand loyal consumers and potential consumers to your brand, to see whether they perceive that they are still on brand and that they have the same translation and interpretation of those emotional and sensory expressions that you've been trying to drive through the sensing brands experience and process. So one of the key outputs of the stage 2, which is creating the desired sensory brand signature, is something called brand in a box. So we have the next slide, and I'll hand over to Simon just to explain how the brand in a box works.
Yeah, one of the things, thanks Sarah, one of the things I've learned from experience is that all this is very well in theory, but there is a need to share some of these outputs across the organisation. So in a nutshell, a brand in a box is exactly that. Once we've created these sensory attributes, it can be really powerful to pull them all together physically and tangibly into a box with a little bit of information explaining, the background to what it is as a team you have done. And then each of these emotional values expressed as a set of sensory attributes or assets, or a sensory expression set, you could call it. And the beauty of this is that then it enables you to share within an organisation and cascade this thinking down throughout the organisation. And it's a very powerful tool, because too often you see brand guidelines as a set of two-dimensional book, which is helpful to a point, but it can be sometimes quite dry. Whereas with brand in a box, constituents for the brand can actually play with the thing and start to smell what the brand is all about and taste and touch. And interestingly, what we've also found on occasions when we've done this is that tool starts to be used externally as well. So it's used as a briefing tool sometimes, and it goes to the communications agencies, the packaging agencies. Even on occasions, it's something that you can share with your key accounts. So it's been shared with retailers, for example, to tell the story about what the brand is all about. So a very powerful communications tool, and that's just one of the outputs of this sensing brands approach. So perhaps, Peter, would you like to start to talk about the next few stages?
Of course. Thanks, Simon. I think, following on from the next stage, which is the implementation of the sensory brand signature, we have a number of tools that we use, a number of measurement tools that we can use to evaluate the sensory brand signature from a consumer perspective. Each of those tools we've given a bit of an acronym. So the first tool that we use is called ASense, and essentially that's understanding the sensory expression as expressed through either above or below the line communications. Effectively, what we're trying to do there is understand the expectations created through a brand's advertising. In other words, what emotions are created through the advertising, what are the promised benefits. So effectively, we're looking at understanding expectations created through advertising by the ASense tool. The second tool we've got in our suite is called PackSense, and that basically looks at packaging, again, both at the aesthetic design, but also functionality and usability of the packaging. So here we're again trying to evaluate expectations and experience generated from the packaging itself. The third tool in our suite of tools is called ProSense, and that's very much looking at consumers' response to the sensory attributes of the product. And here we're looking at both experience and delivery of the product. And then finally, in our fourth tool in the raft that we can deploy is called SSense. And here we're looking at the overall experience and the post-consumption state of the consumer in relation to the sensory brand experience. The important thing to note against all of those four tools is that all of them contain a hefty emotional measurement component within the evaluation, and also include implicit and indirect measurement approaches embedded within those tools. Now, clients can actually buy all of those four measurement tools or deploy just one or two of them, depending on the project objectives. But crucially, the outputs from all of those tools are really there to inform, shape, and guide product and brand development teams in terms of how to take their brand forward. So, Simon, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more about point 4 in the process.
Yes, I think that we recognize that for any initiative like this, as an organization, you will want to try and quantify the outputs, particularly if you're starting to create new sensory attributes. And I think there are two ways that you can do this. Obviously, there are techniques for trying to quantify the consumer response in terms of increased sales. We're not going to cover that really here today, but we've developed thinking around how you can start to ascribe a value to these new sensory attributes as a proportion of the overall asset book value of your brand. So most organizations will have on their balance sheet a value ascribed to the brand. And really what we're saying is that as you add senses, you're adding emotional engagement, and therefore you're adding value. So we've developed a tool that seeks to quantify the value of that new sensory attribute. And it is purely a model, but it helps as a way to start to justify the project internally. And obviously we haven't got time to go into any detail on that here, but just to say that there is a methodology and approach behind that, so that if you're looking at budgets, if you've spent X on developing the new sensory attribute through this process, but as a result you've added 4X to the asset book value of the brand, then everyone's a winner.
And I think it's worth also noting, just before we go on to the last slide there, is we've also got sort of the sales data and the other consumer metrics that you'd have in there concerned with repeat purchase, consumer loyalty. Companies have so many different ways now of monitoring and tracking what consumers are buying, quantities, volumes, linking it up into sales. So there will be other avenues, I'm sure, to various organizations that can track this from a more footfall perspective, sort of bottom-up perspective, as well as, or to accompany the top-down, more strategic financial brand value perspective to it. So to sort of bring together our discussion or presentation on sensing brands, what we perceive as the key benefits from deploying this type of approach to improving and actually adding so much value to the brand itself, but also enhancing and differentiating the product and the packaging, the touch points that the consumer engages with. So you remember on the very first slide there, we had the need to align the brand promise with the consumer experience, and where we're trying to really close any gaps that might be occurring, but at the same time also really maximising those distinctive properties of our product impact experience that the consumer has. So if, you know, smell and scent are a key area that maybe is under-resourced within that category, and that is identified something that is really applicable as a potential for your own product and packaging to integrate it, then that is something that we can bring in there. It adds value to what the consumer is experiencing, it adds value to the brand, and it also is bringing that brand and consumer experience so much closer together. By doing that, we're hoping to obviously optimize product and packaging performance, and as a spin-off from that, it will increase brand value. And here the key thing probably is to think about our customer journey as an integrated experience, from the point of sale, from the point of advertising, all the way through with those touch points too, when they sit on shelves, picking it up, feeling it, touching it, putting it in the shopping trolley, getting it home, going into the fridge or the cupboard, using it when they're preparing meals or whatever the dining or consumption context may be, through to even when they're possibly even disposing it and their memories they have post-consumption, and more importantly, were they satisfied and will they come back and repeat purchase again. So, you know, we're looking at optimizing that entire journey that they have with the product and the brand. And part of the way we're doing that, the whole essence of sensing brands, is multiplying the consumer emotions through new sensory expressions of the brand. And we do call this sort of super additivity of consumers' emotions, and it's really that synergistic added value that you get by multiplying all these different touch points and emotion engagement points that we're expressing through flavour, texture, touch, scent, sound, that maybe we haven't maximised it in the past. By doing this, what we're really doing in that consumer mindset is strengthening those relationships and associations. We've spoken very briefly earlier about emotions is driving a lot of our consumer behaviour and decision purchasing, using what we call System 1 brain, intuitive, instinctive, and therefore we're dialing into strengthening those sort of non-conscious firing sort of processes that are happening that strengthens that association of those attributes with this brand, and therefore making that encouraging loyalty and making it far more distinctive. One of the things we also have noticed from working with the organisations is greater harmony internally, and actually being able to pull the different teams of innovation, technical product and packaging, brand and marketing and sensory and consumer insights together. In some organisations they can be quite disparate, acting in silos, but actually a more joined up approach and more appreciation of each other's perspective and roles within the whole integrated product and packaging and brand development area has led to much greater innovation across the company's offering. And finally there, we've got delivering brand loyalty and advocacy by creating brand signature moments in the hearts and minds of consumers. And so this, you know, I think is so much more pertinent now that we live in a very digital age where, you know, we're blogging, we're on social media, and it's all about sharing positive experiences and trying to engage that repeat purchase and that loyalty to our brand. And we believe that sensing brands is a major way of doing this.
Great. Okay, thank you very much, Peter, Sarah and Simon. It was a fantastic overview of some of the latest thinking and approaches in terms of sensing brands. So I'm sure a lot of the audience would have found the presentation very useful. There's a couple of things I'd like to mention, because they may benefit the attendees here today. The vast majority of you are Campden BRI members, which means you would be eligible to join our member interest groups if you haven't done so already. This is essentially a system of networking events that we run that are free for members to join, to attend, and to access the information. We've got a whole range of groups focusing on different subjects, but the most relevant one to this audience is sensory and consumer, highlighted in red there. The events themselves are used for networking, discussion of topical issues, and keeping up to date with content from speakers. There's a website for the member interest groups. You don't have to attend the meetings to benefit from the content. You can access it in the minutes on the website after the meetings take place, including the presentation. So that might be worth some of you signing up to. Just go to the MIGS website to do that. And if you want to find out a little bit more about the system, then we've got a 2-minute video on the website. The link is there, where Harry Williams, the Member Interest Group Manager, explains what the system is all about and how members can get involved. Okay, a couple more things. We've also got plenty of member-funded project work going on at Campden BRI. Each of the projects we work on has got its own website, where all of the R&D reports, all of the research summary sheets are collated together depending upon your area of interest. And we have got projects that are being steered by the Sensory and Consumer MIG. So those are well worth checking out. The complete list of RSSs and R&D reports is also summarized on the website, so they can be browsed at any time. And if you want to keep up to date via email, then we have got a newsfeed service, which you can subscribe to depending upon your area of interest. So that's worth looking at. You can subscribe to it and unsubscribe as you see fit. Okay, I think we're at the end of the session today. So all that remains to be said is thank you very much for attending. We hope you found it useful. We hope to see you at some of our future events and seminars, and enjoy the rest of your day. All the best. Thank you.